I didn't plan to say anything. Not really. It just kind of slipped out, one glass of wine too deep and too tired to keep pretending everything was fine. I was sitting there in a circle of familiar faces, old college friends, Ethan's coworkers, a few spouses, and someone made a joke about marriage being hard. And before I could stop myself, I said, "Yeah, especially when your husband's sleeping with someone you know." Silence didn't hit immediately. There was laughter first, awkward and confused, like they weren't sure if I was joking or drunk. I laughed too loud, too sharp, and then added, "I mean, it's not exactly funny, is it? Especially when the best friend might have helped cover it up." That's when the room shifted. I felt it. A sudden stillness, like the air got sucked out. I looked up, and there he was. Jason. Ethan's best friend. Standing right at the edge of the room, frozen like a ghost had walked over his grave. His expression said everything his mouth never had. Guilt. Panic. Recognition. That flash of confirmation I'd been trying to force out of Ethan for months. I stopped talking. It hit me so hard I felt dizzy. Everything I'd kept bottled up, all the nights I'd cried in silence, all the gaslighting and excuses and, "You're overthinking it," responses from Ethan, all of it came crashing down in that moment. Not because I was finally believed, but because I saw the look that confirmed it all. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't being dramatic. I was right. Jason turned and walked out of the room. No words. No denial. Just walked out. Someone mumbled, "Rachel, maybe we should." But I couldn't hear the rest. The blood was pounding in my ears. My hands were shaking. I stood up and walked out, ignoring everyone calling after me. In the hallway, the air felt cooler. Cleaner. But I was burning. I caught up to Jason outside near the driveway where his car was parked. He was lighting a cigarette, hands trembling so badly he dropped the lighter twice before getting the flame to catch. I didn't ask politely, "How long?" He flinched. "Rachel, look, I didn't want." "How long?" He exhaled. 8 months. Maybe longer. I don't know exactly. I swallowed hard. "And you knew? The whole time? You covered for him?" Jason looked down. "He's my best friend. And I was his wife." Silence again. This one lasted longer. He didn't say sorry. Didn't make excuses. Maybe he knew nothing would matter at that point. I walked away before I said something worse, before I cried, before I screamed. I didn't want him to see any of it. By the time I got home, Ethan was in the kitchen like nothing had happened. Pasta boiling, music playing. He smiled at me like we were just another couple coming home from a fun night. I said nothing. Just stared. "You okay?" he asked, clearly unsure if I was drunk or upset. "You slept with someone I know," I said. Not even a question. Just a fact. He looked at me for a long moment, blinked twice, and then had the nerve to say, "Who told you that?" "Jason." He paused. Then scoffed. "Jason's not exactly reliable when he's drinking." I didn't blink. "So he lied?" Silence. I stepped closer. "Did he lie?" Ethan looked away. Then down. Then said the worst thing he possibly could have. "It didn't mean anything." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so predictably pathetic. "You had an affair. You had help hiding it. And your defense is that it didn't mean anything?" "I made a mistake," he said. "No, Ethan. A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk. You maintained a lie for months. You used your best friend as a shield. You gassed me every time I brought it up." He opened his mouth to argue, but I kept going. "You made me question myself. You made me feel like I was insane for noticing. And now? You're just upset that it finally came out. I never wanted to hurt you," he said, as if that fixed it. "You just didn't want to get caught." I walked out of the kitchen, into the guest room, and shut the door. He didn't follow. Maybe he knew better. Maybe he figured he could fix it later, smooth it over like always. But I was done being quiet. And I was done being lied to. The next morning, he acted like nothing had happened. Offered coffee. Made a casual joke about me being dramatic at the party. I stared at him and said nothing. That was the first time I noticed it, how nervous silence made him. How quickly he tried to fill the space with words, excuses, stories, distractions. But I wasn't playing anymore. He kept talking. I stopped. And that, more than anything I said at the party, was what hit him hard. The silence didn't last long, at least not for him. Ethan hated quiet. He'd always fill space with noise, TV on in the background, random facts, useless banter. But now he was trying to fill the silence with apologies, with explanations I didn't ask for. I let him speak. I watched him squirm under his own words. He wasn't sorry he cheated. He was sorry I found out. He started pulling out the classics. It was a rough time for us. You were distant. I felt neglected. He blamed the sex, the routines, the stress. He even brought up the miscarriage from 2 years ago as if that gave him permission. I didn't flinch. I just listened. Let him dig. Then he said it. You weren't the same after that. You stopped needing me. That's when I finally looked up. You stopped being there before I stopped needing you. He shut up after that. The truth was, he'd been slowly withdrawing for years. Less eye contact. Less touch. More late nights. I thought it was work. I thought it was just a phase. But it wasn't. It was a slow betrayal wrapped in normalcy. I didn't even see it happening. That was the worst part, how easy it is to normalize being treated like you're invisible. I started looking back at all the things I ignored. The weekend trips that didn't add up. The shift in passwords. The sudden protectiveness over his phone. The change in our bed, less intimacy, more excuses. The way Jason started being around less. I connected every dot I'd been trained to ignore. I was too tired to rage. I just let it all sink in. When you've been lied to long enough, your mind builds two versions of reality. One where things are fine, and another where you're screaming into a void no one else sees. That night, both versions collapsed. And somehow, I felt lighter. I made a decision. I told Ethan I wanted space. Real space. He asked if I meant a break. I said no. I meant a plan. A path out. The next day, I started pulling documents. Bank accounts. Credit cards. Insurance. Everything tied together by marriage. I realized how much of my identity had been absorbed into us. And how little of us was even real anymore. I found an attorney online and scheduled a consultation. I didn't tell anyone yet. Not even my sister. I needed to do this without being talked out of it. He started trying to win me back. Flowers. Dinner plans. Calling me babe, like he used to. It wasn't guilt. It was strategy. He was trying to reset the cycle, like before. Problem, denial, charm, silence. Repeat. But this time, the pattern was broken. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bargaining. I was observing him like a stranger. He asked if I'd go to couples therapy. I said no. Therapy is for people who want to rebuild. I was ready to leave the ruins behind. I slept in the guest room for 2 more weeks. We barely spoke, except about groceries or bills. He stopped pretending to care halfway through. The charm faded, replaced with cold calculation. He even said, "You're really going through with this, huh?" Like it was my fault he gambled our life away. I didn't cry. Not in front of him. At night I wrote down everything I'd lost. My trust. My sense of safety. My own voice. But I also listed what I was about to reclaim: peace, freedom, truth, myself. He tried one last time to twist the knife. Told me I was giving up. Said I was weak for walking away. I didn't argue. I let him say what he needed to. Because people like him only feel powerful when they get a reaction. I gave him nothing. Not because I didn't feel anything, but because I finally realized I didn't need his validation to make my choice real. The night before I filed, I stood in the kitchen alone. The same kitchen where we used to laugh. Where we cooked. Where he kissed me from behind while pretending to care. And I said goodbye to that version of us. Not out loud. Just in my head. Quiet and final. He didn't even notice. The next morning, I served him the papers. He didn't read them at first. He just looked at me and said, "Wow. You're really doing this." I nodded. And then, for the first time since the party, I spoke a full sentence to him that wasn't about logistics. "You don't get to break me and then get upset I'm walking away from the wreckage." He looked like he wanted to argue. But nothing came out. He knew. He signed. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time in months. Not because it was over. But because I finally knew I'd never again have to explain why I deserved better. The fallout hit harder than expected. Not from Ethan, his silence after the signing felt like a relief, but from the world around me. Word got out fast. Jason's absence from mutual events confirmed what I had exposed. Some friends called, pretending to check in, but really fishing for details. Others didn't call at all. I learned quickly who saw me as a person and who saw me as a story. My inbox filled with shallow concern. "So sorry to hear. Let me know if you need anything." But no one asked how I was really doing. Most were more interested in the drama than the damage. I deleted half the messages without replying. Even my own family offered mixed reactions. My mother thought I was overreacting. "You're going to throw away a whole marriage over one mistake?" I didn't even try to explain that it wasn't just about the affair. It was the months of lying, the erosion of trust, the way he let me unravel while he played the good husband. My sister got it, though. She didn't say much. Just came over one night with 2 bottles of wine and didn't ask questions. That's what I needed. Not advice. Just presence. The divorce process moved slowly. Paperwork, signatures, dividing assets. It felt like dissecting a corpse, unpleasant, methodical, final. Every form reminded me of how entangled our lives had become. Joint accounts, shared bills, duplicate keys. I stripped my name off everything one by one, like peeling off layers of skin that didn't belong to me anymore. Ethan stayed distant. We communicated through lawyers. Occasionally through one-word texts. Signed. Received. Confirmed. It was transactional, cold, and exactly what I needed to stay focused. The more distance I gained, the more clearly I saw who I'd been in that marriage. I'd stopped speaking up for myself. I made peace with things that weren't peaceful. I let disrespect slide because it was easier than confrontation. I allowed silence to replace connection. I wasn't proud of that version of myself, but I forgave her. She did what she had to in the moment. Survival mode doesn't leave space for boundaries. But now I had room to rebuild. I started therapy. Not couples therapy, real, personal therapy. It was awkward at first, sitting across from a stranger and spilling years of pain. But it helped. I said things out loud I hadn't even admitted to myself. Like how I'd known something was wrong for a long time but didn't want to start over. How I convinced myself that settling was better than being alone. How I confused comfort with love. Week by week, I peeled back the layers. I stopped saying, "I should have known better," and started saying, "I did the best I could with what I knew then." I changed my routines. Reclaimed space. I painted the guest room. Rearranged the furniture. Donated the bedsheets he picked. I didn't need everything to be new, just mine. I stopped waiting for people to ask how I was. I started telling them. "I'm healing. It's hard, but I'm learning. I'm not there yet, but I'm getting there." It scared some people off. Others leaned in closer. One afternoon, Jason called. I let it ring. He texted after, "Can we talk? I want to explain." I stared at it for 10 minutes, then deleted it. There was nothing left to explain. Betrayal doesn't always come with closure. Sometimes you just have to accept that people you trusted chose themselves at your expense. And no apology can balance that scale. I wasn't bitter. I was just done. The loneliness came in waves. Not from missing Ethan, but from missing the idea of what we were supposed to be. The shared future, the easy companionship, the illusion of permanence. I grieved what I thought we had. Not what we actually did. But with the loneliness came clarity. I noticed how often I used to shrink myself to avoid tension. How I over-explained everything. How I walked on eggshells not to upset a man who was already betraying me behind my back. I promised myself I'd never do that again. I wrote a list of non-negotiables. Not for future relationships, but for myself. Respect. Honesty. Reciprocity. Space to speak. Space to be silent. And most of all, space to walk away if those things disappeared. I reconnected with old friends. Not the ones who pick sides, but the ones who knew me before I became a shell of myself. We met for coffee, for hikes, for late-night drives. They didn't ask what happened. They just reminded me who I used to be. That woman was still there. I just had to uncover her. Little moments started to feel bigger. A solo dinner without checking my phone. A laugh that didn't feel forced. A morning without a pit in my stomach. These weren't milestones anyone else could see, but I felt them. Healing wasn't linear. Some days I missed him. Not him, the habit of him. But I let the feeling pass without judgment. I didn't text. I didn't spiral. I just breathed through it and moved on. Eventually, the silence became comforting. Not empty. Not punishing. Just quiet. I didn't need to fill it. I didn't need to be heard to prove I existed. I finally understood something I hadn't before. Walking away wasn't a mistake. Staying silent for so long had been. I started learning what peace actually looked like, not the fake kind I used to chase in my marriage, where silence meant suppression and walking on eggshells felt like safety. This peace was unfamiliar at first. It was quiet, but not empty. Still, but not stagnant. It gave me room to breathe without fearing what would happen next. For the first time in years, I began to live without waiting for the next emotional landmine. I changed my routine entirely. Woke up earlier. Started journaling. Not about Ethan. Not about the betrayal. About me. What I liked. What I needed. What I never spoke up about. I forced myself to write without editing, without filtering for what anyone else might think. That's when I realized how much of my voice had been silenced, not by him, but by the version of me that always tried to keep the peace at any cost. I wrote about moments I'd buried. Like the time he canceled my birthday dinner for a work meeting he never attended. Or the time I cried in the bathroom, and he told me I was being too sensitive. I had convinced myself those were small things. But they weren't. They were evidence. Of disregard. Of indifference. Of a relationship I was single-handedly carrying while he focused on someone else. I stopped minimizing those moments. I forgave myself for accepting less than I deserved. I started showing up differently. With friends. At work. In conversations. I spoke with more clarity. I stopped apologizing for having boundaries. If someone asked something I didn't want to give, I said no. Not, maybe later. Not, I'm not sure. Just no. And I didn't explain. The power in that was addictive. I realized how often I'd contorted myself to be agreeable. How I'd softened my truth so others wouldn't feel uncomfortable. How much space I gave people who never earned it. That version of me was gone now. And I didn't miss her. People noticed the change. Some drew closer. Some pulled away. Especially the ones who were only there when I was easy to manipulate or silence. I let them drift. No fights. No final words. Just distance. If I had to shrink to keep someone, I didn't want them near me anymore. Ethan reached out once, months after the divorce was finalized. Just a short message. Hope you're doing okay. I stared at it for a full minute before deleting it. Not out of anger, but because I didn't need anything from him anymore. Not validation. Not closure. Not even a conversation. He had already taken enough space in my mind. I wasn't going to give him more. I started traveling again. Nothing big. Just solo weekends. Coastal towns. Quiet forests. Places where no one knew my story. Where I didn't have to explain why I flinched when someone raised their voice, or why I ordered my coffee with quiet precision, like making the wrong request would trigger judgment. Those small trips reminded me I could be whole without being attached to anyone. I took off my wedding ring, not just from my hand, but from my identity. I stopped thinking of myself as someone who used to be married. I was just Rachel now. A woman who had loved, lost, and lived through it. I found joy in unexpected places. Late-night conversations with strangers. Cooking for myself without feeling judged. Listening to music he used to hate and dancing in my kitchen like no one had ever told me I was too much. Because I wasn't too much. I had just been with someone too small to handle me. Therapy became less about survival and more about growth. I started setting goals not tied to anyone else. I wanted to build a life I didn't need to escape from. One where I didn't need someone to tell me who I was. One where I never had to trade self-respect for affection again. I started mentoring younger women at work, those going through breakups, confusion, betrayal. I didn't give them advice. I just listened. Because sometimes that's all someone needs, a reminder they're not crazy for wanting more than half love. And slowly, I let love back in. Not from a partner, but from friends, from family, from myself. I let people care for me without feeling like I owed them something in return. I stopped earning love like it was a debt to be paid. That shift changed everything. One afternoon, while clearing out an old box of wedding photos I'd never gotten around to throwing out, I paused. Not because I missed him, but because I no longer did. That photo, his arm around me, both of us smiling, looked like a scene from someone else's life. I didn't feel grief. I felt gratitude. Not for the pain, but for the clarity it gave me. I used to think leaving would break me. That walking away meant I failed. But the real failure would have been staying quiet. Swallowing myself year after year just to keep an illusion alive. What I gained was mine alone. Peace. Strength. A voice. And the absolute, unshakable knowing that I would never, ever betray myself again to make someone else comfortable. That was the beginning of everything. Moving forward wasn't a straight line. Some mornings still hit me like a wave, regret, anger, the sting of wasted years. But it didn't last. The difference now was, I didn't sit in those feelings. I let them pass through me without trying to hold on or shove them away. I had learned that healing wasn't about pretending you're okay, it's about trusting that you will be, even if today hurts. People started asking if I was ready to date again. The answer wasn't simple. I wasn't looking to fill a void. I wasn't looking for revenge romance, validation, or distraction. I was learning how to be whole alone. That kind of wholeness doesn't come from swiping or small talk. It comes from choosing yourself every day, even when it's easier to slip back into old patterns. So, I didn't date. Not out of fear, but out of respect for the work I was still doing. I didn't want to hand someone a half-healed version of me and call it love. I wanted to be full. Not perfect. Just grounded. I focused on building things for myself. My career. My apartment. My habits. I created spaces that reflected who I was, not who I had tried to be in that marriage. I got rid of the neutral tones he liked and filled my space with color. I started writing again, not just journaling, but essays, stories, truths I had never given myself permission to say out loud. I submitted one to a local blog. They published it. It was raw. About betrayal, recovery, and the myth of the good wife. The feedback poured in. Women wrote to me saying they saw themselves in my story. That they, too, had been silent for too long. That they were finally ready to leave, or had just left, or wished they had the courage. I didn't give them courage. I just gave them language. That was enough. It was the first time I realized my pain had turned into purpose. I started speaking at small events. Not formally. Just women's groups, book clubs, support circles. I didn't position myself as an expert. I was just honest. I shared what it felt like to question your own worth because someone else treated you like an option. What it meant to stop chasing closure and start creating peace. What it looked like to build a life from the wreckage without pretending you weren't still sweeping up glass. The more I shared, the lighter I felt. Like I was finally turning the worst chapter of my life into something worth reading. One night, I got a call from a friend who'd been distant during the divorce. She admitted she didn't know how to show up when it happened. Said she thought I might go back to him, and didn't want to be the one who said too much. I told her I understood. That silence isn't always malice. Sometimes it's fear. And fear makes people disappear. We talked for hours. Reconnected. Forgave each other. That conversation reminded me of something important. Growth isn't just about walking away from what hurt you. It's also about returning to what matters, with clearer eyes and stronger boundaries. I had started meditating. Not the cliché kind. Just 5 minutes in the morning, 5 at night. Breathing in. Breathing out. It centered me. Helped me unhook from old emotional loops. I no longer needed to relive every argument, every lie, every moment I missed a red flag. I didn't need to re-prosecute my past to justify the life I was building now. Forgiveness came slowly. Not for Ethan. For myself. For the years I stayed. For the moments I didn't listen to my gut. For the times I confused being chosen with being loved. I stopped blaming the woman I used to be. She was doing her best in a situation that was never going to give her what she needed. There was nothing weak about her. She just hadn't woken up yet. And when she did, she burned everything down to save herself. That deserved grace. Eventually, the old triggers faded. I could hear his name and feel nothing. I could pass the restaurant we used to love and not need to turn away. I could sit in the silence I once feared and feel completely at home. Not lonely. Not numb. Just whole. I still didn't know if I wanted to fall in love again. But I knew I would never again fall into someone just to avoid falling apart. That kind of desperation masquerades as romance. It's not love. It's survival. I didn't need saving anymore. I stopped asking what he was doing now. Who he was with. Whether he missed me. It didn't matter. My healing wasn't dependent on his remorse. Closure didn't require his participation. Every day I stayed honest with myself, I healed more. Every boundary I held, I reclaimed something he tried to take. Every time I honored my own voice, I rewrote the ending to a story that used to be about betrayal. Now it was about becoming. I didn't have all the answers. But I had my voice. My clarity. My worth. And that was enough. Looking back, I understood the real lesson wasn't about betrayal or heartbreak. It was about self-trust. I had spent so long outsourcing my intuition, letting someone else's version of reality override what I knew in my bones. Now, everything I built rested on a foundation of believing myself first. If something felt wrong, I didn't rationalize it away. If someone's actions didn't match their words, I didn't make excuses for them. I observed. I acted. I protected my peace without apology. I no longer saw the end of my marriage as a failure. Staying would have been the failure. Silencing my hurt, denying my needs, pretending half love was enough, that would have been the real tragedy. Walking away, speaking the truth even when it shattered everything familiar, choosing myself over the comfort of denial, that was my victory. I started sharing what I'd learned, not just with women going through divorces, but with anyone standing at the edge of a hard decision. I told them, the fear is real, but it's not the whole story. You will grieve what you lose. But you will also grieve what you gave away trying to keep it. And the second grief, the grief of self-betrayal, is so much heavier. I learned that love doesn't demand the sacrifice of dignity. That loyalty to someone else should never come at the cost of loyalty to yourself. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let go, even if you still love them, even if you're terrified of what comes next. People talk about closure like it's a gift someone else has to give you. But real closure is a choice. It's deciding that your healing matters more than understanding why they hurt you. It's accepting that no explanation will ever make betrayal feel justified. It's walking away without all the answers because you finally realize you don't need them to move forward. There were moments I still stumbled. Days I doubted myself. Nights I wondered if I had been too harsh, too quick to burn bridges. But those thoughts didn't rule me anymore. I let them rise and fall without judgment. Healing wasn't about eliminating pain. It was about no longer letting pain drive my decisions. I started dreaming again. Not the small, survival dreams I had when married, just get through the week dreams. Big ones. I started thinking about where I wanted to live, what kind of work I wanted to do, how I wanted to spend my limited, precious time. I wasn't designing a life around anyone else's comfort anymore. It was mine, fully mine. I realized the biggest betrayal wasn't what Ethan had done. It was how long I had abandoned myself trying to make the unworkable work. But recognizing that didn't crush me. It freed me. Because if self-abandonment was the real wound, then self-return was the cure. And that was entirely within my control. I no longer blamed the party for what happened. The oversharing, the confrontation, the unraveling, it all needed to happen. Speaking the truth, even when it was messy and inconvenient, was the catalyst that broke the illusion I had been clinging to. The mistake wasn't talking too much. The mistake was staying silent for too long before that night. In the end, everything that fell apart did so because it was built on denial. Truth wrecks falsehood. And my life needed to be wrecked so it could be rebuilt on something real. I began surrounding myself with people who valued honesty, even when it was uncomfortable. Friends who didn't flinch when I spoke my mind. Mentors who challenged me instead of pacifying me. Relationships that could withstand conflict without crumbling. I demanded more, not out of bitterness, but because I finally understood what healthy love looked like. It wasn't perfection. It was accountability. It was consistency. It was two people meeting each other without one person carrying all the weight. It was trust without walking on eggshells. It was freedom within commitment, not suffocation disguised as loyalty. I promised myself I would never again stay in spaces where I had to beg for the bare minimum. Never again silence my needs for someone else's convenience. Never again measure my worth by how much pain I could tolerate. The woman who walked into that party was scared, silenced, and desperate for connection. The woman who walked out, heartbroken and humiliated, was the beginning of someone new. Someone fierce. Someone free. I didn't owe anyone the old version of me. I didn't owe anyone my silence. I didn't owe anyone the right to hurt me twice. I owed myself the life I almost gave away trying to be loved. That was the real story. Not the scandal at the party. Not the infidelity. Not even the divorce. The real story was about reclamation. About burning down the illusions and standing tall in the ashes, unafraid of what would come next. I wasn't just surviving. I was living on my terms. The final chapter wasn't about revenge or regret. It was about release. Letting go of what was never mine to hold. Forgiving myself for what I didn't know. Honoring the version of me who dared to choose better. No matter what came next, I knew one thing for sure. I would never again betray myself for love. Because the deepest, truest love story I ever lived through was the one where I finally chose me.